Yeah, I hang out with teenagers all day, and I have like so much fun while I'm here. And I get to talk about really bizarre art stuff that I know, and just really bizarre stuff that I know. So I have a wonderful time at Yak. So my name is Germain Hatcher. I have just always done art, and I actually went to school for art, and then I moved back to the Monterey Peninsula after being in LA for 10 years. And in 2000, I started working as a muralist for the county. I also worked at Richard McDonald's Studios pouring waxes, and then I started working in art stores. I always continued to do my own art. And then I met Meg and Marcia in 2000, right after they opened Yak, and loved the program. Always would go to everything they had, volunteered for as much as I could. And then in 2012, I was hired to be a mentor at Yak. And I've been working on my own artwork, just sort of trying to get the painting that is in my head out. So there you go. The show that's at the Avery Gallery is a continuation of work that I've been doing for the past 10, going on 11 years now. I started working with WPA photographs and transcripts from the Library of Congress, and I had read a book in late 1990s called Bullwhip Days, and what it was 32 transcripts of ex-slaves, and they were all put together in a book. That watercolor is a woman named Mamie Prater. She's 121 years old is what they said. So she's interviewed by a reporter, and she tells him that she's 121 years old, and he does not believe her. And interestingly enough, she tells him what it's like to live on the plantation and all this other stuff. And the great-grandson of the family that owned her winds up making a trip to Los Angeles. And they get together and they have this conversation. And she's mentioning people that he knows through his family line, and he verifies everything that she says. So yeah, so that's like Mamie Prater, and she actually visited the White House, and she wound up, I think she died in like 1921 is what I think, but like I'm really bad with dates, so don't ask. So, like, that particular piece talks about wet nursing. During slavery, there were slaves that were wet nurses. And each one of those pieces, there's actually something that's going on underneath the foreground painting. And what's going on in that one is it's a black mother breastfeeding her child. Because at the time that wet nurses were breastfeeding the children of their masters, they couldn't breastfeed their own kids. So their kids were either farmed out or starved. There was a plantation that burned down last year. And there's this really interesting story where they were taking people through, and they had this whole thing where like the bed was raised. And the reason that the bed was raised was because the wet nurse slept under the bed so that she could take care of the baby in the master's house. So this piece, there's this great song called Grandma's Hands. It's like I saw this picture and I thought, I love her hands, right? So the underside of that picture, there's actually like watermelon and peanuts underneath it. And then it's just like when you go to your grandma's house and you're sitting on grandma's lap and she's telling you a story. Like that is the coolest experience. And like my grandmother, complicated woman, but the one thing I always loved about her when I was a kid was like my grandma would hug me and she was squishy, and I just loved that like squishy hug that I would get from my grandmother. While I was working with certain things, I sort of got sidetracked into what foods, how does like food communicate so much about people? Where do some of our foods come from? What does our GDP looks like? You know, what was it like? One of the major products for the United States prior to cotton was something called Carolina Gold, which is actually out of North Africa. And then you have like the peanut. Like the peanut started in Peru and then made its way to Spain, then China and Africa, and it makes its way to North America through the transatlantic slave trade. And then the peanut is actually used to feed livestock, and I use quotations around livestock because it was also used to feed slaves. After World War II, baseball becomes a really big thing, and then you get roasted peanuts, and now peanuts is like the world snack. So that piece is based off of Carolina Gold, which was a rice, and it's actually it's grown in South Carolina, Gullah Geechee country. And the Gullah Geechee have a really long, interesting history in the United States. Part of it has to do with where they are geographically. So there's islands off of the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. And you start in, Tybee Island, and it sort of makes its way up. But they're islands, and so because of the heat and the temperatures and stuff like that, like plantation owners didn't know how to do it, how to farm rice. But the Gullah Geechee did. And so by and large, their history is probably one of the most linear histories in the United States because they were the least interfered with. And so behind them is actually the plant, like what's painted out over is actually rice. Rice plants, yeah. So, okay. This piece was kind of like a challenge piece to me because I wanted to do multiple figures and sort of figure out like the ultimate painting that I have in my head has a lot of figures in it. How are these paintings going to lay together? And this is just sort of an overall statement about cotton. Like as a kid, I remember they would send trucks around and the kids would go out and pick cotton. And that's what they did during the summer. And it is a hard plant to pick. So under the underside of that, there are huge cotton bolls, and then you have like the women picking cotton, you have some of the kids picking cotton, and ultimately it's a sharecropping situation, which means that nobody gets ahead. Yeah. I think that's all. Yay!